Welcome back now for the news in detail. We begin from Mexico, where police have found 9 bodies hanging from a bridge in Mexico City alongside a drug cartel banner threatening rivals. Police say 10 more bodies have been found hacked up and dumped beside a nearby road. The killing spree was reported in the western state of Michoacan. State Governor Lopez Solis says rival gangs are fighting over territory to control drug activity in the area. In Egypt, security forces have killed 17 suspected militants in 2 separate raids. The Interior Ministry says 8 militants were killed in Fayum province when security forces stormed their hideout near Cairo. It says a similar raid in a suburb of the capital killed 9 others. The raid came 4 days after a car bombing killed 20 people outside Cairo's main cancer hospital. The ministry says the Hamas militant group was responsible for the bombing. The Indian-imposed siege of occupied Kashmir has entered its 5th day amid a blanket curfew and complete communications blackout. Little information is leaking out of the occupied valley, but there are reports of clashes between Kashmiri protesters and Indian forces. Several Kashmiris are known to have been shot dead amid the arrests of more than 500 people. More in this report.
Kashmiris living beyond the reach of India's occupation have feared the worst for their brethren since they were cut off from the world on Sunday evening. Both angered and worried by the situation, hundreds of Kashmiris staged a demonstration in Muzaffarabad, capital of Azad Kashmir. Many fear for the well-being of their relatives living under a siege and forced by 900,000 Indian troops. The Kashmiri protesters visited the office of UN ceasefire monitors to register their complaint against India's state terrorism.
We appeal to the United Nations to find a peaceful solution and grant us self-determination before the situation propels us towards a nuclear war.
Demanding the right of self-determination for Kashmiris, the protesters condemned India's unilateral and illegal accession of the occupied state.
We will be standing up for our right at all costs. Any solution in which the Kashmiris are not involved will not be acceptable to the Kashmiris under any circumstances.
On August the 5th, New Delhi revoked Article 370 of India's constitution, ending Kashmir's special status as a disputed territory. The move has provoked a furious reaction from Pakistan and fueled global concerns of conflict in the region.
Meanwhile, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has arrived in Beijing, while tensions with India rise over Kashmir. The visit comes 3 days after India revoked occupied Kashmir's special status. During his visit, Qureshi will meet his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi. Speaking to the media just before leaving, Qureshi said India wants to disrupt regional peace by revoking Articles 370. Qureshi said he will discuss the situation with the Chinese leadership. Earlier, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi said the scrapping of Article 370 is the beginning of a new era. India stripped occupied Kashmir of its autonomy on Monday, imposing a crushing curfew and communications blackout. Over 500 Kashmiris, including 100 assembly members and 2 former chief ministers, have been arrested. Lack of food and water has compromised life as the lockdown enters its 5th day. Moving on, Saudi Arabia says it has intercepted a Houthi drone launched from Yemen towards Abha city airport. Coalition Forces spokesman Colonel Al-Maliki says all attempts by Houthi rebels to launch drones have been neutralized. On local television, a rebel spokesman announced the launch of 2 drone attacks on the kingdom's southern airport. He said the attack targeted the monitoring tower and other sensitive military installations in the city of Abha. Meanwhile, Iran says the United States naval coalition will cause regional insecurity in the Gulf and the Middle East. Iranian Defense Minister Brigadier General Amir Hatami says Persian Gulf security can be maintained by regional states. Talking to his Kuwaiti, Qatari and Omani counterparts, Hatami proposed a Gulf security dialogue. The Iranian minister says Tehran is providing security in the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz and Gulf of Oman. He warned that Israel's inclination to join the US military coalition could cause catastrophe in the Persian Gulf region. Tehran state media says Qatar and Kuwait are satisfied with Iran's role in providing security for the Gulf. The United Nations says fresh fighting in Northwest Syria after the collapse of a brief ceasefire is threatening the lives of millions. It says the risk of civilian casualties has risen, with people returning to their homes during a lull in fighting. UN's humanitarian chief for Syria, Panos Montes, said total panic has eclipsed the region. He said over 500 civilians have been killed and 400,000 displaced since fighting escalated in April. Syrian forces restarted operations after rebels targeted a military post in the region. Jailed PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan has offered talks with Turkey in return for a political solution to the Kurdish conflict. In a statement issued by his lawyers, Öcalan said he will not push for a separate state. Öcalan said he is ready to negotiate an end to the PKK's 35-year-old insurgency. He claimed the Kurdish issue could be resolved within a week and called on Ankara to make concessions. The offer comes amid an escalation in Turkish air raids on PKK positions in neighboring northern Iraq. Earlier this week, Turkey and the United States reached an agreement to establish and manage a safe zone in the Kurdish-populated northeastern Syria. Libya has deported 141 Sudanese migrants as part of a voluntary return program. The repatriation was made from Benghazi's Benina airport and does not include any children. Sudan's Consul General Omar Saleh says the deportation aims to voluntarily return migrants who do not hold legal residency in the country. Libya is one of the main departure points for African migrants who flee poverty and war in a bid to reach Italy by boat. The United States and 5 European countries, including the United Kingdom, France and Germany, have asked Moscow to withdraw its forces from Georgia. Belgium, Estonia and Poland have also issued a joint statement on the 11th anniversary of the Georgian conflict. The countries are asking Moscow to abide by the EU-mediated ceasefire agreement reached in 2008. The joint statement marked the 11th anniversary of the Georgian conflict with South Ossetia. Georgia's foreign ministry says Moscow is impeding the creation of international security mechanisms. Moving on, the United Nations has criticized the latest US sanctions against Venezuela, saying they will intensify the suffering of millions of people. This comes after Washington seized all Venezuelan government assets and banned commercial transactions. The United Nations Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet says the sanctions are extremely broad and will hit the most vulnerable society. Bachelet says she is extremely concerned the measures will worsen the country's humanitarian crisis. Meanwhile, Norway says it is in contact with Venezuela's government and opposition about resuming talks. President Nicolas Maduro has called off this week's round of Oslo-mediated discussions. U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper has met South Korean President Moon Jae-in in Seoul. The visit follows a series of missile tests by North Korea to express anger at United States and South Korea's joint military exercises. It also comes amid escalating trade tensions between key U.S. allies, South Korea and Japan. In an earlier meeting with South Korean Defense Minister Jeong Kyung-do, Esper agreed to jointly pursue diplomatic efforts to denuclearize North Korea. Esper said the two countries will continue to work together for regional peace.
Together with our allies from around the region, we will remain resolute in our enforcement of the United Nations Security Council resolutions until the North engages in complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
South Korean Defense Minister Zhang also briefed US Defense Secretary Esper about the ongoing trade dispute with Japan. He said Japanese restrictions on tech exports are biting into economic relations and security cooperation with South Korea. Now moving on to Britain, which has put the entire onus of a no-deal Brexit on the EU, saying its resistance could cost both sides. Britain's foreign minister has pressed the European Union to amend the terms of Britain's withdrawal agreement. In an interview, Raab said the UK will have to adopt a hard Brexit if the EU does not alter its stance. Raab said a second referendum on Brexit posed the biggest risk to the United Kingdom. The minister said the Irish backstop was unacceptable.
If the position from the EU is that the withdrawal agreement can't be changed, whether it's add-ons or subtractions, then at full stop, which is their position to date, then let's face it, they will be taking the decision to see the UK leave on no-deal terms, and that's the responsibility that they'll have to bear. We would like a deal, but the backstop, in its certainly in its current form, is undemocratic, and it's something that will have to be removed.
Labour's Jeremy Corbyn has asked the Cabinet Secretary to rule on whether Boris Johnson could force through a no-deal Brexit in a general election period. Now moving on, Italy's far-right Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini has pulled his support for governing coalition and called for snap elections. The leader of Italy's League Party says differences with coalition partners cannot be mended. This came after months of fighting between his League Party and the anti-establishment Five Star movement. Five-star leader Luigi Di Maio said his party does not fear another election. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has asked Salvini to justify his call for an election to the parliament. He said it was not up to Salvini to summon parliament or dictate the steps of the political crisis. President Sergio Mattarella is the only person with the power to dissolve parliament. Opinion polls suggest Salvini's far-right League Party can prevail if snap elections were called. Kyrgyzstan special forces have detained former President Almazbek Atambayev after a raid on his residence. This comes a day after an attempt to storm his compound left one officer dead and a police chief in critical condition. Former President Atambayev had ignored a police summons for questioning on corruption charges. His supporters say these are politically motivated. In June, Kyrgyzstan's parliament stripped Atambayev of immunity and his official status as a former president. Now, China has declared a red alert as its densely populated east coast braces for the impact of a powerful typhoon. Super typhoon Likima is expected to make landfall in Zhejiang province on Saturday. It is battering Taiwan with winds topping 190 kilometers per hour. China's emergency ministry says rescue teams have been deployed along the eastern seaboard to deal with Likima's impact. Thousands of Shanghai residents have been warned to prepare to evacuate their homes. Flood warnings have been issued for eastern sections of the Yangtze River and the Yellow River until next week. Jiangsu and Shandong provinces have also been placed on high alert. Coming up next in the bulletin after a short break is world's largest collection of fossils unrivaled. Now tell stories of people usually overlooked. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news. Greece has approved legislation scrapping a law that made universities a no-go zone for police. Authorities say the move will tackle lawlessness, but critics call it a clampdown on democracy. Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis' newly sworn government said the law has been used as a cover for criminality for decades. Conservatives argue the university sanctuary has outlived its purpose and being hijacked by criminals. They also say the law has rendered police intervention ineffective. Opposition leader Alex Tsipras said the move is an attempt to undermine Greece's public universities. Bulgarian artist Galia Stoyanova paints on unusual canvas. She draws animals and characters from local folklore on delicate feathers. More in this report.
Feather art has gained popularity only recently. Many feather artists, including famed English artist Ian Davey, draw wildlife. Bulgarian artist Galia Stoyanova was searching for the images of birds and animals on the internet when she discovered Ian Davey's work and got inspired.
I did more searching and found other people doing this. I was interested to try it myself to see how it works.
Stoyanova is self-taught. She uses thin-tipped brushes and watercolor or acrylic paints to create her designs.
I just collect these feathers and decide which ones could be used or which ones needs repair. Those are from a turkey.
Initially, she gave the painted feathers away as gifts to her friends, but now her creations have gained wider attraction. Stoyanova says she gets satisfaction from fighting the challenges involved in creating her artworks and producing good results.
Meanwhile, tourists now face a 250 euros fine for sitting on Spanish steps in Rome. Police patrols the 18th century marble steps, blowing whistles at visitors sitting down. Built in 1725, the Spanish steps are part of the famous Piazza di Spagna in Rome. A UNESCO World Heritage Site, the monument has long been a favorite spot for tired visitors. People can be fined 400 euros for dirtying the steps leading to the Trinita de Monte church. The measure is among a number of rules reinforced by the authorities to protect its monuments. This includes a ban on messy eating, jumping into fountains, and dragging wheeled suitcases down historic staircases. August 9th marks the 74th anniversary of the United States dropping a second atomic bomb on Japan, this time at Nagasaki. The blast killed more than 74,000 people. More in this report.
In a ceremony commemorating the 74th anniversary of Nagasaki bombing, the city's mayor Tomohisa To read the peace declaration. He said knowledge of horror of war is an important first step to peace. The ceremony was held at Nagasaki's Peace Park. Mayor To said his heartfelt thoughts go out to the people who perished in the bombing.
I request the Japanese government to firmly maintain a philosophy of peace in the Japanese constitution, which outlines a determination to never go to war, and to also take leadership in spreading this idea to the world.
The current Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe wants to find ways to reduce the nuclear menace.
In order to create a meaningful outcome at the conference, I will take some suggestions from the last year's meeting for nuclear disarmament held in Nagasaki and actively work with other countries.
After the war, the victims suffered prolonged illnesses from their exposure to the bomb's radiation.
I will continue to appeal for abandoning nuclear weapons until I die. This is a way to honor the 200,000 people who lost their lives in Hiroshima and Nagasaki 74 years ago, and people who have been suffering the after effects of atomic bomb.
Japan had to surrender by August the 15th, 1945, marking the end of the Second World War.
Moving on, the Nairobi National Museum is home to one of the world's largest collections of fossils, unrivaled in Eastern Africa. Recently, the bone structure of a previously unknown prehistoric carnivore was rediscovered in the museum's storage. More in this report.
Deep in the storage of Nairobi's National Museum, this unassuming drawer contains an archaeological gem. The giant jawbone of Africa's largest ever predator, a prehistoric carnivore 3 times larger than a polar bear. At 23 million years old, this discovery made headlines the world over and is considered essential for developing understanding of the evolution of mammals.
It shows the wealth of Africa in terms of our past ecosystems and what used to be in Africa, and we can do reconstructions of the environment from these, the possible diets from these, and what other animals they would have interacted with.
But this important fossil was not unearthed this year. It had actually been in the museum for over 40 years before it was recognised as a new species. Museum staff knew the bones were something special. They just didn't know exactly what, and lacked the resources to properly investigate. There are only 7 paleontologists in Kenya.
99% of those people who work here are foreigners, foreign people. So it's important for people in Kenya to understand the importance of this to the country and venture or study things to do with human origins and evolution.
The museum has not changed much since the 1960s. A card-based, handwritten filing system is still in place. Between 7,000 and 10,000 new fossils arrive in the museum's laboratory every year, and the task of cleaning and logging each specimen is painstaking. With a backlog that could yet take years to work through, the hope is that many more unidentified evolutionary treasures lie in wait.
American tech giant Apple has announced a $1 million reward to hackers who can detect flaws in iPhones and Macs. This is the highest ever bug bounty offered by a major tech company. The prize is only valid if the hacker gains remote access to the iPhone kernel, with no action from the phone user. The giant says it will supply special iPhones to security researchers next year to help them find security flaws in iOS. Apple's previously highest bounty was $200,000 for the friendly reporting of bugs. Now at the Pan American Games in Peru, America's Daniel Carr has won gold in the men's 100-meter backstroke swimming final. Brazil's Guilherme Guaido claimed silver, while Trinidad and Tobago's Dylan Carter took bronze. Carr took the top spot in 53.5 seconds. Guaido missed out on gold with a slight margin of 0.04 seconds to get silver. Carter reached bronze after finishing 0.92 seconds behind Carr. Meanwhile, Brazil's Larissa Pimenta has clinched gold in the women's judo 52-kilogram category. Mexico's Luis Olvera claimed silver, while Vanessa Godinez of Cuba had to be content with bronze. Now let's have a look at the weather updates across the world. With the weather update, we come to the end of this bulletin. For more news and updates, keep watching Indus News.